All right, so the video I have searched out for today's lunch break is the following. Someone suggested it in my Discord, which, by the way, if you're not part of the Discord server yet, !Discord. A lot of fun discussions always going on and stuff like that. And you can also suggest videos for me to watch on stream. And someone suggested this one yesterday or last night, and I think this sounds like a cool video to watch. It's called The Price of Competing in TCGs. How much does it really cost to compete? I think that's an interesting thing. So let's watch it. It's relatively new. It's from yesterday, so most of you probably haven't seen it yet. It sounds like a good react for a lunch break. Also has the perfect length for a lunch break, so let's get
Competing
into
in
it.
any trading card game can be a daunting task. Not only do you need to worry about practicing for the event, but you also have to invest into travel costs and potential entry fees. The biggest thing, though, is the price of the cards themselves. Players are limited to what they can play depending on the prices of decks with all the other costs that go with competing. In this video, I'll be going over these 10 different card games and comparing
Okay, we have the big three, Magic, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh! And then we have some upcoming stars, like One Piece is relatively new, Digimon is relatively new, Battle Spirit Saga is very new. Isn't that the one where Avril Lavigne made an ad for on Twitter or something? I think that's Battle Spirit Saga. Flesh and Blood, Weiss Schwarz, Vanguard, and Dragon Ball. Okay.
how expensive they are to play at the highest level. So some of the rules
Is Vanguard alive? Unironic. I'm not. No offense, but I never see Vanguard anywhere.
Adding those prices together. Now, I don't compete in all of these games myself, so some of these might be up for debate, but this is all
Vanguard
based on my own
okay.
research. And I am also using lists that have done well in events. So these lists might not be the most average list, but it was a deck that did well at the very least. And then obviously only doing the minimum rarity of cards. And if there are different variants of decks within the top tiers, I will reduce it down to one instead of having a bunch of different ones. So like in Yu-Gi-Oh, there's pure Runic Control and Naturia Runic. And Weiss Schwarz, there's 3 different Sword Art Online decks that are viable. So I am just reducing them down to just one of those variations, so we can see a more diverse field of prices. All the prices are gonna be done through TCG Player, and I've also done these prices on May 2nd, so these might look different than when this video comes out, and the prices will fluctuate over time. And when doing the final prices, any cards that overlap to more than a playset between the decks will be removed. So if 2 decks are running a 4 of, or a full playset of something, then I will only count the first playset, and then anything afterwards will be removed from the math equation. And then this will show how much overlapping will happen within each game. Now, if a card is optimal at less than a playset, so cards like Baron de Fleur is usually a 1 of, or cards in the G zone for any Vanguard deck, I will still be counting it as a full playset. So once we get past 3 Barons, then we'll start cutting more, because I'm not super knowledgeable about every game and every game having an optimal number, but I don't think it changes that much from what I've noticed. So the first game we'll talk about is Magic the Gathering. Now, I know the Commander is the most popular format, but I think to keep this fair, we're gonna do Standard because Commander is not cheap. We will be doing the Standard format for every single game for this. So for Magic, the 5 decks are Grixis Midrange, Esper Legends, White Midrange, Red Winds, and Rakdos Midrange. And here are the prices for all of those, which brings the total to $1,940. And
so that, I feel like, okay, 450, 600, 250, 150, 490. I don't know anything about Magic. I don't know if those are the top 5 decks. They probably are. That seems about the price of Yu-Gi-Oh as well. I think Yu-Gi-Oh is probably in a similar ballpark. Do you think Yu-Gi-Oh is more expensive than this? We can't see. Only the right one is 490. Hold up. I can remove the sub goal. Where is it? Now you can somewhat see it.
if we take the average cost of it, it's about $388 per Magic deck.
Yugi is
Here are a
less.
list of the duplicates in each of these decks, which reduces $677 from this and brings our grand total down to $1,263, which makes the deck average about $253. There's a ton of...
But this is only if you want to own all the decks, right? It only makes sense to remove the duplicates if you want to obtain every single deck, right?
overlap between these decks.
These top
Now,
five,
the
which is
overlap
not
happens
necessary.
when
I mean,
there's multiple
I will
decks
say,
playing the same color.
for someone who competes at a high level in a game, it's probably accurate because I personally always, at any given format, I own multiple decks, right? There's a lot of people that probably don't do that, right? They only have their one deck that they keep changing, and if they want to acquire a new deck, they sell their old deck. I personally don't do that. For me, it's more like I need to have all the options available because I change what I play very constantly, and I'm like my standard is I want to play what I think is the best, right? So I own a Labyrinth deck, but I haven't played with it in a long time. I own a Despia deck. I own a Kashtira deck. I own a Runic deck. I own a Purely deck. I have all those decks because I want to be able to play them if I think they're best, right? And I usually end up, maybe that's me being lazy, but I usually end up losing money on all of those because I don't sell them at the right time. I keep them around just in case I want to play them. Like, for example, I still have my Perla Rhinos because I just never bothered selling them before Ishizu tier became irrelevant, right? You own a Mathmech deck? I actually don't. I genuinely don't.
So right now, there's a ton of black. 3 of the 5 decks are playing black cards. There are 10 copies of Sheol Dread total, and 12 copies of Fable of the Mirror Breaker, which these are really big money cards. And just
hey, I guess this card in my staple or stinker with the card market, guys.
Those combined shaves off $600. So once you get your initial set of those cards, then building into other decks in Magic becomes a lot cheaper. And a lot of the time, the same colors are playing the same staples. So unless there's a huge variety of every single color seeing play, it seems like typically the initial cost of the game will be really...
I just got an ad even though I'm subbed. I don't know why that keeps happening. Someone else said that earlier too. I don't know why. I didn't even click an ad or something. I mean, they run automatically most of the time, but like, I don't know why you're getting that.
high, but it gets lower the more you invest into it. Next up is Pokemon.
You shouldn't get one.
The 5 decks for Pokemon are Lost Box, Gardevoir, Lugia, Mew, and Control Box.
I have an ad
all
too,
together
and I'm
with
subbed.
duplicates,
You really shouldn't have that.
Is there like $395, which is about $79?
It's a glitch on mobile. Oh,
now,
okay.
if we look at the duplicates, Pokemon naturally is just a cheap game. They make all of their staples really low rarity and really easy to come by. And because of the sheer amount of packs that gets opened for Pokemon, even high rarity stuff is still a little bit cheaper than most other games. But
did you turn off the setting by accident? I don't think so, because there'd probably be more people complaining if that was the case. I don't remember messing with the settings. I haven't. Mexit, thank you for the 6 months. Appreciate that.
Main core of your deck, usually about like 50 or so cards, are going to be really, really cheap. And then the huge differences change.
But I'll double check with my settings later.
So if we look at the duplicates, there isn't really much here that is worth a lot. There's 2 extra Forest Seal Stones, 6 extra Nest Balls, and 8 extra Battle VIP passes. And that's like the majority of the extra cost. Everything else is $1 or less. And you can very, very easily build decks for extremely cheap in this game. So once we take out the dupes, then the total goes from $395 to $343, and your average deck cost becomes $69. Nice. Next up is Yu-Gi-Oh!
Nice.
So the decks for Yu-Gi-Oh! Are Kashtira, Naturia Runic, Sprite, Mathmech, and Branded. So with all of these costs, our total
Mathmech, cheap ass deck, dude.
with duplicates is $1,990. So our average deck cost is $398. If we look
Instant Fusion, thank you for the 5 months. Welcome back.
at the duplicates, then there are some cards that stand out here.
How is Sprite 400? I don't know which version they took, but like, how much is blue? Blue is probably around 30 to 40 still. And then it just plays, if they took a list that had Fenrir in it.
So Infinite Impermanence, there are 8 extra copies and they're $12 a piece, which shaves off 96. And then there's other like one-of cards like Zeus, Triple Tactics, and stuff like that. And Ash Blossom is also very used. Our total duplicate reduction is $190, which brings us to a even $1,800, which makes our deck cost on average $360. Initially, before I started doing this, I fully expected Yu-Gi-Oh! To be a lot more expensive expensive. I initially expected Yu-Gi-Oh to reduce a lot after we cut duplicates, because a lot
People complain a lot about Yu-Gi-Oh's cost, but it's really not that bad.
of the staples can be pretty expensive. Over the past year, Konami has done an insanely great job reprinting these really powerful hand traps and cards like that, to where now the hand traps have become a lot
Why do we
cheaper,
shave
and
off
a lot of the
duplicates?
money
I don't really understand it either, but I guess the idea is that if you want to own multiple decks, you only need to acquire 3 copies of Ash Blossom. You don't need to have 9 copies for 3 decks, right? So if you want to count the average cost of each deck, if you want to acquire multiple decks, you don't have to count 9 Ash Blossoms because you only need 3. That's why they're shaving off if they look at the top 5 decks and all of them play Ash Blossom, they're not counting 15 times Ash Blossom, they're counting 3.
now is within the archetype itself. So that's why Kashtira is the most expensive deck here, because they have a ton of cards that are like $20+. And the staples that are a really high price tag aren't really used within these decks at the moment. Things like Triple Tactics Thrust and Pot of Prosperity. Yu-Gi-Oh does suffer from the rule I'm doing of optimal card amounts, but currently there doesn't seem to be that much messing with it. It's like Zeus is the primary one. So Yu-Gi-Oh could be cheaper than it actually shows on here, but for the sake of this video, we're doing it like this. Next up is my main game, which is Vanguard. So kind of the whole purpose I've done this video is because Vanguard has had a real big price problem recently, and I wanted to compare it with every other card game. So the decks I'm doing for Vanguard are Chronojet, Ava, Overlord, Youth.
In general, by the way, I think these types of comparisons are very, very cool and very rarely done. Because I think very, very often looking at how other card games do certain things is very interesting, but we never really do it because we also don't really have the expertise, right? Like you never really know what's going on in other card games. But I think it's very interesting to be like, yeah, how do other games deal with power creep? How do other games do their rarity distributions, all that kind of stuff, right? No one's into all card games. Yeah, but you could theoretically, like, for theoretical discussions, you could get people from other card games to join you and tell you how it is in Pokemon and how it is in Magic, right? I've been thinking about the idea, or I've been thinking about this, like, doing something together with other content creators from other games to, like, discuss certain aspects of their games and how it is in Yu-Gi-Oh, how it is in their game, what could be done better. I think it's interesting.
And Minerva. And
this
here are
is
the prices
kind
of
of
these
like
decks.
that.
Our grand total with duplicates accounted for is $2,255, which makes our average deck cost $451. Now, if we go into the duplicates, Vanguard kind of suffers from this because a lot of the time it's very nation and archetype based on the decks, and decks kind of build themselves right now in standard. And because of the nation system, there are very, very, very few cards that can actually overlap with each other unless they're in the same nation. And the one card that does overlap in all of these decks is Elementara Sanctitude. Now, since Sanctitude is at a hard one of, I'm counting just one as a playset. So there are 4 extra of them and they're 25 a piece. So we reduce $100 off of the Vanguard price. And there's also Personified Chalice. 2 decks have one, which it's also just a hard one of. So we shave off another $18 from there. And then the rest of it is just cards between Youthberg and Minerva because they're from the same nation. And it's just mostly your generic, just staple cards.
I don't know what any of
like
this
effects,
means.
Triggers, and over trigger and PGs. So altogether, Vanguard reduces by $211, which takes our total down to $2,044 and our deck average $409. Next up is White Schwartz. So the decks I'm doing with White Schwartz.
So Vanguard is more
SAO
expensive than Yu-Gi-Oh and Magic. I would have never thought
deck,
that.
8 standby quintuplets,
like,
Hololive.
I never hear. I don't even know anyone playing Vanguard.
Altogether, our price, it goes up to $795.
Once again, no offense, but I never hear anything about Vanguard
per deck. There are no duplicates in White Schwartz, and I could have done the like 3 different Sword Art Online decks because they're all pretty viable. But for the sake of the video, I wanted to see without similar decks within that, which makes White Schwartz just impossible to reduce because of just how the game functions, and you can only play cards within specific titles within each other. So you can't mix Sword Art Online cards with 7 Deadly Sins cards, stuff like that. So Y Schwartz's cost does not go down, and the big thing to understand with it is if you want to continuously compete, you're going to have to buy into new sets a lot of the time, because Y Schwartz doesn't consistently support all of the sets all the time. Y Schwartz also has, from what I've noticed, a really long lifespan for the meta decks. A lot of the time, these decks will last a year at minimum. You will be able to easily have enough money by then to buy into a new deck. And the cost of buying into decks on average is cheaper than everything we've seen so far, other than Pokemon. Next up is One Piece. So the decks I'm doing for One Piece is Zoro, Captain Kid, Kinemon, Whitebeard, and Ivankov. And
One Piece is pretty cool, by the way. I've had a friend of mine teach me One Piece. I probably never get into it more because I'm just Yu-Gi-Oh main and there's no time for other games, but I've played One Piece. It's all right.
altogether, our total with duplicates accounted for is $615, which makes our deck cost average $123. So I'm not a One Piece player myself, but what I've noticed from looking at these decks is because of how the color system works, a lot of the times these colors have packages within them where if you play that color, you're going to play basically a bunch of these certain cards and you'll be able to use those cards in every single deck of that color. So 2 of these decks are green and 2 of these decks are red, and they both have the individual packages within them. Between cutting all of the duplicates from these, we reduced the price by $87, which brings our grand total
One Piece is cheap unless you play red,
down from $615 to $528, and our deck cost average being $106 per deck.
So the thing is, I've played Digimon a little bit together with my fiance. I've played a bit of Digimon, and both Digimon and One Piece are both done by Bandai. And you can say a lot of things about Bandai. They did a lot of things. What they're doing is sometimes a little bit weird, but their rarity system is insane. The rarity system is so good because every single card has a cheap version, but pretty much almost any. So like almost every deck can be played super budget friendly for like very cheap, or you can, if you really want to, you can get super fancy with it, and those cards look really good. Right? Pokemon does the same thing and also does it very well. Right? So
now
that's
One
why
Piece
specifically those games have very low cost.
I'm unsure on how.
Yo, Raid, thank you for the 10 months. Welcome back.
How much these prices will change over time, but for now this is a pretty solid starting point for any new card game. Next up is Digimon. So the decks I'm doing for Digimon
I expect to be almost the same average.
Hunters, Red Hybrid, War Greymon, and Chaos Dramon. And the
only deck I'm guessing the only decks that go over like $200 or something is the ones where you need like a secret rare in Digimon, because those are like, I think it was like there's only 2 secret rares per set. So they're relatively hard to get. Everything that's not a secret rare is basically dirt cheap. Unless you need a secret rare. That's like, the secret rares can be like $50 or something, but everything that's not a secret is GG, like pennies.
Initial cost is $520, which makes our cost average $104. And none of these decks have any duplicates within them, so that will be our final total.
Is that Shurek?
So
yeah, that's
Digimon
Shurek.
is very interesting. I thought it was a game that was pretty expensive, but there's 2 decks on here that are $55, and then 2 more decks that are $100, and only 1 other deck that breaks $200 on here. So being able to compete in Digimon is actually very cheap. Just the one issue with it is it has the Y Schwartz problem, it seems like, where a lot of your cards won't overlap. So if you want to play a new deck, you basically have to buy a full new deck without being able to use your old stuff.
What's your favorite Digimon series? I've only seen the first one or 2.
But that is my
I was never that much into Digimon.
Competing in the highest level. But getting into competitive Digimon seems to be one of the cheaper games we've seen. Next up is Bandai's newest card game that just came out, Battle Spirits. So I really wanted to put a game on here that was fresh off the market and seems to be
I've never seen. I don't know how this game
expensive
works.
This game is. So Battle Spirits, the decks I'm using is Red Pterosaur, Purple Curse, White Control, Siege Worm, and Purple Soul Control. So here are the prices for all of those, which makes our grand total $1,110 and makes our cost average $222. So every
Digimon
deck on here breaks $200.
There's been multiple different versions of a Digimon card game. The current one is from like 3 years ago. I think 2020 is when it started. So not that old yet.
Going to the duplicates, there is a very clear reason why. Every single one of these decks is running 4 copies of Absolute Ice Shield, which is a $30 card. So there are 20 copies here total. So there are 16 extra. Makes us reduce $480 from our cost whenever we take out duplicates, which is insane. There's also some other semi-pricey cards on here, like Infernal King Curse Dragon. There's 2 extra copies of those. Starblast Draw is $1.50, but it's ran as almost a 4 in every single deck. So we shave off $15 from that. There's 13 Burning Forces, which they're $1 a piece. And there's 2 extra Gigantorexes, which they're $17 a piece. And then a bunch of 1 or 2 of cheap cards. So with all of the duplicates being cut in mind, our total cost goes from 1...
They should have done this differently. They could have also solved the problem with cards like Baron de Fleur or Zeus if they just had done the average amount a card is being played if it's being played. Right? So like if in 5 decks 2 decks play Baron de Fleur and both of them play 1 copy, the average amount of Barons you need is 1. So like, you know what I mean? That would have been much easier.
1,100.
Just take the highest amount in any, or that. You could have also done that. Highest amount, yeah.
$10 to $511 and makes our average deck cost $102, which is an insane jump. Basically, once you buy your Absolute Ice Shields, all of these decks are $120 cheaper. So they all become really about $100 in order to build a new deck each time, which is a pretty solid amount on the cheaper end of most games. Next up is Flesh and Blood. So Flesh and Blood is a little crazy. So the 5 decks I'm using on here are Azalea, Islander, Briar, Dash, and Lexi. And here are the deck.
What is going on with Flesh and Blood? The hell? Why is Flesh and Blood so expensive? Do people even play that game? Those cards look sick. The artwork is pretty cool on Flesh and Blood. Wow, what the hell? That's way more expensive than Yu-Gi-Oh, dude. What is that average? Like
is the
700?
only deck on here out of all 10 of these games that breaks $1,000. And it's not like the other decks are much cheaper either. So our grand total with no duplicates accounted for is $3,720, yeah. Which makes our deck average $744, which is absolutely insane. Now, it's a completely different story once we look into the duplicates. There's 2 really big things immediately stand out with duplicates.
There are cards that you need to play multiples of that are $230? Bro, it's been a long time since we've had that problem in Yu-Gi-Oh!
4 of the 5 decks are running a 1 of equipment called Fyendal's Spring Tunic, which is a $230 card. So if we take out the 3 extra, then we instantly shave off $690, which brings our total down to about $3,000. And then there's also Command and Conquer, which is used in every single deck at varying ratios. And there are 7 extra of them, and they're $80 a piece, which shaves off another $560 from there. And then there's also Enlightened Strike, which is $40 a piece, which we have 5 extra. So we shave off another $200 and then another couple cards here and there. So in total, through duplicates, we shave off $1,548 from this, which makes our grand total go from $3,720 to $2,172.
Okay, but this is not a very good way to measure this, because if you look at this average price that you've calculated of around $400 only gets you 1 of those decks. Any of the other 4 decks you can't play. This is a very bad way to standardize this. You should have done this a lot differently. Like that does not work for anyone. Like if you're like, okay, the average cost of getting into Flesh and Blood is 400 something bucks, is not accurate if you're looking at these numbers. Like that is not what you're like. Because people are, it's like basically saying like, yeah, if you already have your staples, acquiring another deck is going to be cheap. But that's not what that's not what it's suggesting. But okay.
On here, but once you take out duplicates, it's
Zen
actually
TTV,
not
thank you for
that
the
far ahead
raid. Welcome
of
everybody.
some of
We are currently on the lunch break, but we're about to be finished and jumping back into Master Duel. We're watching an interesting video comparing card prices in different trading card games right now. We'll be done in a few minutes.
the other games. And then the last game is the Dragon Ball Super card game. So the decks I'm using for here are SS4 Goku and Vegeta, Gamma 1 and 2, Sin Shinron, Android 21, and Kumba. Yeah, I think that's how you say that. And here are the prices, which brings our total with no duplicates to $1,895, which makes our cost average $379 per deck.
Okay, so that's another Bandai game, which explains why it's decently low. But I think one of the reasons why Dragon Ball stuff is getting more expensive these days is because, unironically, I think it's not as successful. Low. I mean, it's lower than Yu-Gi-Oh, for example. The average, or what was the average for Yu-Gi-Oh? It was after they shaved off the duplicates, Yu-Gi-Oh was like 300 something. So it is less than Yu-Gi-Oh. So it is lower compared to Yu-Gi-Oh, but it is higher compared to all the other Bandai games. And I think that is, and once again, I'm not into Dragon Ball. I might be wrong on this. So, but my impression, or what I've heard from other Dragon Ball players, is that the game is not as successful, which is why the stuff is not being opened in high quantities, which is why the people that do want it, they kind of have to pay for it. But maybe that's wrong. That's just what someone has told me. Euros had around 100 players. See, that's not that many. I feel like that's not that many. It's like okay-ish, right? And so there is people that play it, but I don't think there's the huge quantities of Dragon Ball stuff and Dragon Ball product being distributed and being opened, which is why the cards can still be relatively expensive. So it's like you would think that if a game is not as successful, there's not that much demand for it, and so the cards should be cheaper because not many people play it. But at the same time, the people that do play it, there's also not that much supply because, you know, smaller community, so it can still be relatively expensive. It's kind of interesting how the market works on some of these, but it's really sad because if you're trying to get into a game competitively, and it's already hard because not that many people play it and there's not that many big tournaments and so on and so forth, and then the stuff is still so expensive, it's like, you know, why would you, it's like it makes it so much harder to get into the game.
So looking at the duplicates, Dragon Ball kind of has the One Piece problem where because of you being locked into certain colors, a lot of decks in their colors have different card packages within them. So if you invest in the one color, then the game gets a lot cheaper if you only play that color. But if you're playing it with a bunch of different colors, the game gets a lot more expensive. So the big two colors on here are blue and red. There are 2 decks for each of those on here, and they share a lot of cards. So all the red decks are running Defender of Friends Gohan, the Merciless Barrage Yamcha, and the SS4 Gogeta. So those together shave off about $90 with a couple other like cheap red cards as well. And then a lot of the blue cards run this Android package between Android 17, 18, and 21. And those themselves shave off a ton of money itself, which altogether we are shaving off $248, which reduces our total from $1,895 down to $1,647, which makes our cost average $329, which is still pretty expensive. But just like in One Piece or Vanguard or Magic, if you invest in the one color, then the game gets cheaper if you only play that color. So with all of this in mind, here are the rankings of the deck prices before we start cutting dupes. So the most expensive game is Flesh and Blood, and then number 2 was Vanguard. Vanguard was the only other game that broke $2,000, and then Yu-Gi-Oh was about $300 under that.
This sounds about right. Overall, I think it's gonna look more skewed after we cut the duplicates. And this sounds about right from what we've seen. It's like Pokemon, Digimon, One Piece were exceptionally budget friendly, and then there's like this middle of the pack with like Spirit Saga Wise Schwartz kind of, and then like these are all around the same, and then Flesh and Blood just seemed unreasonably expensive.
Magic was $50 under that. Dragon Ball was $50 under that. And then we shoot down the Battle Spirits by over $800. And then after Battle Spirits, we start going under $1,000 territory with Weiss Schwartz, and then One Piece, and then Digimon, and then Pokemon. So this is before we cut the duplicates. This is the current ranking of these games price-wise. But once we cut duplicates, a couple things happen. So our top 3 is still the same, in the same order. So Flesh and Blood, then Vanguard, then Yu-Gi-Oh! And then Dragon Ball and Magic swap. Magic shoots down over $600, which makes it a lot.
So this is basically something that's relevant when you're one of those players that likes to have multiple decks available, I suppose, right? Like if you are someone who likes to have all the different options available, then this is more accurate for you, right? If you care about having different decks, right? But yeah.
Cheaper. And Dragon Ball only shot down.
The first one is better for entry cost. Well, no, also not really. The first one is kind of I don't adding up the top 5 decks doesn't really make sense in my head. Because you don't need 5 decks to play, right? Like this statistic doesn't feel like it's that meaningful, right? It's like, I don't know. I'm not sure what to make of this statistic. You should have just taken like, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Under that, Magic was $50 under that. Dragon Ball was $50 under that. And then we shoot down the Battle Spirits by over 800.
That was interesting. I think that's the end. There's nothing that much. There's not much left. Okay. Interesting though. I like the idea of looking at different games in comparison. I think that's something that's not done often enough. I think most people, when they are content creators for a certain card game, they only stick to their own game and never really make or draw comparisons to other card games and how it's done in other card games. And I think that can be a very insightful thing, especially when we theorize about things like a rotation or the rarity distribution that we have or whatever else, right? A lot of those things have been done differently in other card games, and you can like glance over and see how it works out for them, and that helps you make better arguments. So I think that's interesting. All right. Do you play any other card games? I've played a lot of other card games, but I've only Yu-Gi-Oh has always been my main game. I've played Yu-Gi-Oh. I've played. I know how to play Magic, but I've never really competed in Magic. I know how to play One Piece, but I haven't competed. I've competed in Digimon. I've played Pokemon. I've played a lot of Hearthstone back in the day. I've played a lot of Legends of Runeterra. During COVID. I'm a card game enthusiast, but I've never really had the time to fully explore other card games because I've always been, Yu-Gi-Oh main. But I really like other card games and enjoy a lot of other card games too.